A 29-year-old woman goes to see her general physician complaining of fatigue and palpitation. She says she has also lost weight, though without dieting. On examination, her pulse rate is approximately 120 per minute and irregularly irregular. Her blood pressure is 142 by 89 mm of Hg and her body mass index is 19. There are no added cardiac sounds. The ECG confirms the diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. What would you suggest as the most useful next investigation? Option A, thyroid function tests, TSH, free T4. Option B, ECG, chest X-ray, full blood count and fasting blood sugar. Let's think for 30 seconds, then we'll discuss. Read carefully. Let's discuss what is the answer. Let me know in the comment box who got it right. This clinical picture is most common in thyrotoxicosis. This clinical picture indicating thyrotoxicosis. Thyrotoxicosis. And for these, thyroid function tests will be the most useful next investigation. Thyroid function tests. The most common cause of atrial fibrillation in young people is thyrotoxicosis, particularly in the absence of any valvular disease. Of course, we need ECG to exclude any valvular disease, but the clinical picture says there is no added cardiac sounds. Okay, so there is no indication of that. Now chest x-ray we can do for investigation of the retrosternal goiter if there is any indication. Okay, then full blood count or fasting blood sugar, it can be done routinely as a routine examination, but in this case thyroid function test is the most useful next investigation. A 71-year-old man is being treated for congestive heart failure with a combination of drugs. He complains of nausea and anorexia and has been puzzled by observing yellow rings around lights. His pulse rate is 53 per minute and irregular, and blood pressure is 128 by 61 mm Hg. Which of the following indications is likely to be responsible for these symptoms? Lisinopril, spironolactone, digoxin, furosemide, bisoprolol. Read the question once again and mark your answer and let me know if you correct or not. So the big deal here is yellow ring around lights. It must be a side effect of any drugs. So you have to know which drug can create such type of side effects. So this characteristic is particular with digoxin, that is a cardiac glycoside. Digoxin is the answer, and this yellow tinged vision is also common with digoxin. This yellow tinged vision is also called xanthopsia. 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 This is characteristic with digoxin, and his slow pulse rate also indicating, and also blood pressure is low, indicating toxicity, drug toxicity, most probably digoxin toxicity. So in this condition, the cardiologist should consider lowering dose or withdrawal of digoxin, as we know that the first line of treatment for congestive cardiac failure is not digoxin. So we can think about the drug withdrawal of digoxin. So this is very interesting MCQ. Yellow rings around lights. This is particular with digoxin or cardiac glycosides. A 28-year-old man has been newly diagnosed with asthma. He has never been admitted to hospital with an asthma exacerbation and experiences symptoms once or twice a week. You discuss the treatment options with him. His peak expiratory flow regarding is currently 85% of the normal predicted value that is expected for his age and height. Which of the following is the most appropriate first step in treatment? Short-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler, long-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler, low-dose steroid inhaler. Option D, leukotriene receptor antagonists. Option E, high-dose steroid inhaler. Read the questions again and think carefully. Some point is important here, that he is newly diagnosed and never admitted to hospital with asthma exacerbation, and symptom is also not that much, mild, once or two a week, and you need first step in treatment. So what should be the answer? For answering this, you have to know the protocol of treating asthma according to British Thoracic Society. According to them, the protocol is, if symptom is mild or symptom is once or twice a week, first step is to give short-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler. Short-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler is the first step. What is the second step of it? Second step is to add steroid inhaler like beclomethasone, and dose is according to the severity. So the second step of treating asthma is adding inhaler, steroid inhaler with short-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler. Now third step, what is the third step of treatment? Using long-acting beta-2 agonist inhaler. So option B is for third step. Long-acting beta-2 agonist example is salmeterol. You have to give long-acting beta-2 agonist and high doses of steroid inhaler in case of step 1 and step 2 fails. Then step 4. Step 4 is using adding leukotriene receptor antagonists like montelukast. You have to add this along with steroid and long-acting beta-2 agonist. Or you can add theophylline or slow releasing beta-2 agonist tablets. If all fails, then fifth step, according to this protocol, fifth step is to give oral low dose steroid. So this is very important protocol. So first step of asthma management is giving short acting beta 2 agonist inhaler. Second step, along with short acting beta 2 agonist inhaler, you have to add inhalation of steroid. Third step, use long acting beta 2 agonist inhaler and increase the dose of high dose steroid. Increase the dose of steroid. This is third step. 4, you have to add leukotriene receptor agonists like montelukast, or you have to add theophylline or oral tablet of slow release beta 2 agonist. If all fails or symptoms worsen, then you have to go to fifth step, that is using low dose oral steroid tablets. Next is, you are asked to request imaging for a patient with a suspected pneumothorax who you have just examined in accident and emergency. Which of the following would be the most appropriate first step imaging modality? So you encountered a suspected pneumothorax case who has encountered an accident, and what should be the most appropriate first step imaging modality? CT chest, ultrasound chest, chest X-ray, VQ scan, CTPA. The answer is chest X-ray. Okay. For mild pneumothorax or small pneumothorax, that is around thin rim around lungs, you have to go for chest X-ray. This is the first step imaging modality. Okay. And if there is very small amount of small pneumothorax, then you don't have to do any treatment like chest drain. You have to just observe 7 to 10 days and you have to take chest X-ray again if it is resolved or not. CT chest, it is more specific test, but chest X-ray is the first step and sometimes, most of the times, it is enough. Ultrasound chest, it is used in case of pleural effusion, mainly pleural effusion, or to see the chest drain. VQ scan and CTPA, these two for pulmonary emboli. Pulmonary emboli. So these two is for pulmonary emboli. Ultrasound chest for pleural effusion, and for small pneumothorax, chest X-ray. In case of moderate pneumothorax, then also chest X-ray can be done, and you have to observe after 24 hours. In case of airless lung, that is a huge pneumothorax, then also you have to do chest X-ray and you have to observe after 24 hours. But in two cases, moderate and large, you have to place chest drain. The next question is, which of the following is the most common cause of duodenal ulcers? NSAIDs, Helicobacter pylori, alcohol abuse, chronic corticosteroid therapy, Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. It is a relatively easy question, and the most common cause for duodenal ulcer is Helicobacter pylori. It is responsible for 90% of duodenal ulceration cases. 90%. NSAIDs, overuse of NSAIDs, alcohol abuse, Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, these all are responsible for duodenal ulcer, maybe, but not so common like Helicobacter pylori. What is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome? Is home task. home task. Read and will take your self test about Zollinger-Ellison syndrome next any videos. So next, a 56-year-old man presents with a 2-week history of diarrhea, which has not settled following an episode of food poisoning. Which of the following would be the most appropriate investigation? Full blood count, urea and electrolytes, stool sample for microscopy, culture and sensitivities, abdominal X-ray, liver function test. 2 weeks is a long day. The most probable answer is this. Stool sample for microscopy, culture and sensitive for giving appropriate antibiotic against appropriate bacteria. You have to find out which bacteria or which microorganism is causing this diarrhea, and you have to give proper antibiotic for that. So this is the answer. Next, a 67-year-old man presents feeling unwell and complaining of general malaise. He mentions a long history of alcohol abuse and his past medical history shows deranged liver function tests. Which of the following clinical signs does not form part of chronic liver disease? Which is not a clinical sign of chronic liver disease? So exclusion method. Finger clubbing, it is related to chronic liver disease. Palmar erythema, that is also related to chronic liver disease. Spider nevi, that is also related to chronic liver disease. And jaundice, that is also related to chronic liver disease. Koilonychia is not. There is a spoon-shaped fingertip, spoon-shaped nail bed of finger, no? Spoon-shaped. This is seen in iron deficiency anemia, not in koilonychia. In chronic liver disease, you can see leukonychia instead of koilonychia. In case of chronic liver disease, you can see leukonychia. That is a white mark in fingernail. That is related to hypoalbuminemia and is related to chronic liver disease. So the answer in case of this question is koilonychia. That is not a symptom, not a sign of chronic liver disease. It's a sign of iron deficiency anemia. Next is, you see a 40-year-old woman who has diagnosed with Crohn's disease 10 years ago. Due to a severe attack of Crohn's, which failed to respond to medical therapy, she had a small bowel resection. Your register tells you that she is at risk of developing vitamin B12 deficiency as a result of her surgery. Which part of the small bowel is responsible for the absorption of vitamin B12? Actually, in a nutshell, the question is which part of the small bowel is responsible for the absorption of vitamin B12? Is it jejunum? Second is proximal ileum. Third is duodenum. D is terminal ileum. E is none of the above. It is a memory based question actually. The answer is terminal ileum. Terminal ileum is responsible for absorption of vitamin B12. If vitamin B12 absorption is not there, you have to give supplement of vitamin B12. And what are the clinical picture you can see in case of vitamin B12 deficiency? Glossitis, neuropathy, That will be very common in case of vitamin B12 deficiency. Now, proximal ileum, that is responsible for absorption of B2 and C, vitamin C and B2. Jejunum is responsible for absorption of vitamin D plus nicotinamide plus nicotinamide. And duodenum is responsible for absorption of iron, calcium. So this is important thing you have to remember, which part is responsible for absorption of which vitamin, which mineral. Okay, next revise again. Proximal ileum is responsible for vitamin B2 and C. Terminal ileum for vitamin B12. Jejunum is responsible for absorption of vitamin D plus nicotinamide, and duodenum is responsible for calcium, iron. Let's move into next slide. A 58-year-old African man presents with pitting edema of his ankles. He suffers from recently diagnosed hypertension but is otherwise healthy. Blood tests show low albumin and a urine dipstick is positive for protein. The most appropriate initial treatment is high protein diet. Option B is diuretics. Option C is prophylactic anticoagulation. Option D is ACE inhibitor. Option E is bed rest. What can be the answer? A very interesting questions it is. Read and think. What are the things you have to help in thinking? Low albuminemia. Second, edema. And third, urine dipstick is positive for protein. That means proteinuria. So proteinuria, edema and albuminemia, that is a classical picture of nephrotic syndrome. Nephrotic syndrome. And the first line of treatment for nephrotic syndrome is dietary inhibition of sodium. So you have to take low sodium. Second is using diuretics. So the answer is diuretics. So the first line of treatment of nephrotic syndrome is to low intake of sodium and using diuretics. High protein diet doesn't help. Bed rest is not indicated, contraindicated, because in case of nephrotic syndrome, protein coagulant factor like prothrombin, these are also get lost from your body. So you can suffer from a hypercoagulable state. So bed rest is not indicated. Sometimes prophylactic anticoagulation treatment we have to consider because of this hypercoagulable state. But answer of this question is diuretics. Next, move on to next question. A 51-year-old man complains of severe diffuse back pain. An X-ray finds several lytic lesions in the vertebra alongside hypercalcemia. Baines-Jones protein is detected in the urine. What is Baines-Jones protein? Is it IgG antibody, IgA antibody, IgE antibody, light chain, or IgM antibody? We know what is Baines-Jones protein. It is related with multiple myeloma. Its presence in urine is common also in multiple myeloma. And what is Benson's protein? It's a what? Option D, light chain immunoglobulin. No? So answer is light chain. Next, which of the following is an effect of a diuretics? Decreased cardiac output, increased fluid volume, increased sodium reabsorption, increased chloride ion reabsorption. Diuretic. Is it increased fluid volume? No. Diuretics decrease fluid volume. This is also not the answer. Increased sodium reabsorption, increased chloride ion absorption. That is also not the answer. Answer is decreased cardiac output. As because diuretic decrease fluid volume, so cardiac load is lower. So consequently, that will lead to decreased cardiac output. So the answer is option A. Next, the REM sleep cycle occurred approximately every dash minutes: 45, 60, 75, 90. What is REM sleep cycle? Is your home task. Home task. Answer is 90. This is the answer. So that was our self-test medicine MCQ for today. We'll meet you next video. Thank you very much.